firearm identifiable to anyone. The right arm of friend and foe. And the most sold pistol of all time. The Glock. On the warm day of July 19, 1929, Gaston Glock would be born in Vienna, Austria, and before becoming an incredible businessman, he would be forced to serve in the Wehrmacht during the late days of World War II. After the war, he would go on to finish school and become an engineer at a local hand drilling company. In 1963, however, Gaston would found his own company and would begin by fabricating curtain rods throughout the rest of the 60s. Later on, in the 70s, he became more interested in military tools and equipment. He would go on to develop grenade shells, knives, and machine gun belt links during the 70s for the Austrian military. However, in 1980, the Austrian military began looking for a new handgun to replace their Walther P-38s, which were left over from World War II. Gaston would become aware of this in 1982 and began reaching out to handgun experts from various industries and sports shooting organizations. This is because Gaston had no previous experience in manufacturing firearms and would have to rely on their knowledge of handguns to come up with something special. The Austrian military had a list of 17 requirements for their new standard sidearm, several of which were that it had to be self-loading, loaded in NATO's standard 9x19mm cartridge, and had to be secure against accidental discharges. So, following these requirements, Gaston would go on to develop the Glock 17, a polymer-framed, striker-fired, short recoil-operated handgun that was nothing like the world had seen before. Gaston had made the genius decision to make the Glock's frame out of polymer, which allowed the pistol to be lighter as well as lowering the manufacturing cost for him and the purchasing cost for Austria. In 1983, the Austrian military would test the Glock against several handguns. These handguns were the HK P7 and P9, the Sig Sauer P220 and P226, Beretta's 92 SBF, FN's Browning High Power, and the Steyr GB. During the test, the Glock would be put through the ringer. It would have to fire 15,000 rounds of 9mm and then be inspected for damage, before firing an overpressured cartridge with a PSI of 73,000, which is over twice as much pressure than normal. The Glock would pass the test with flying colors and miles ahead of the other contenders. The former head of Austria's defense agency would claim that the Glock had surpassed the other handguns in its performance, handling, ammo capacity, and price. Austria would go on to designate the Glock 17 as the P80 and continue to use the Glock 17 in other variations to this day. In 1984, the Glock would pass NATO's durability test, and as a result, the Norwegian military would select the pistol as their standard sidearm the following year. After the results of the Austrian military's handgun trials, many Western countries would become interested in the Glock, especially the United States. You see, America had been looking for a replacement for their aging stock of M1911 since the beginning of the 70s. Shortly after Glock won the contract from Austria, America requested several Glock 17s for an unofficial test. Later down the road, Glock would also be offered to enter the XM9 personal defense pistol program. However, they declined due to the DoD's requirements, meaning that Gaston would have to drastically redesign the Glock to enter. I mean, I don't blame Gaston for declining. He obviously knew he had developed an amazing handgun that was the cutting edge of handgun technology at that time. In 1988, a few big things would happen for Glock. First, the Glock 17 would be selected by the Swedish military. Then Gaston would go on to introduce the second generation of Glocks. And, possibly most notably of all, the Glock 19 would be developed. The Glock 19 is the second most famous variant of the handgun and is a compact version of the pistol. It has a 4.02-inch long barrel as opposed to the Glock 17's 4.49. The ergonomics of the pistol's grip had also changed on the second generation of Glocks. During this time, police agencies worldwide would begin adopting the Glock, especially the United States. As of 2025, over 65% of all police agencies in America have been issued Glocks. Later on, in 1998, Gaston would reveal the third generation to the world. This iteration of the Glock added several new features to both the chagrin and appreciation of users. It introduced finger grooves to the grip, which was a controversial choice due to the difference of shooters' preferences. Some loved the finger grooves and claimed that it helped with recoil management and comfortability. However, the opposite was said by those displeased with the choice. But there was one new design choice that would be appreciated by all, and that was the addition of Glock's proprietary accessory rail. This rail allowed the placement of various lights and lasers to the frame. This design wasn't without its flaws either though, as due to the fact that most light and laser mounts had been specifically designed to fit on Picatinny and Weaver rails, which were vastly different to the design of Glock accessory rails. This meant that lights and lasers of the time had a hard time sticking to the rail properly. However, Glock would go on to introduce their own weapon light for their pistols, which makes you wonder if the rail's design choice was specifically to profit off of future light sales. Nowadays, most mounts don't have any issue sticking to the rail, and many aftermarket frames choose to just use Picatinny to solve the issue completely. 11 years later, in 2009, the fourth generation of Glocks would be developed, with minimal changes being made to the handgun other than the modularity. In 2013, the British Armed Forces would select the Glock 17 and 19 to replace their Browning high powers, and would designate them as the L13-1A1 and the L13-7A1. In 2016, Glock would introduce a new slide for their pistols. This would be the MOS, aka the Modular Optic System, which would allow for the placement of various plates for mounting optics. This was a huge deal, as prior to this, those who wanted to mount an optic to their Glock would either have to buy mounts that attached to the frame of the gun and hung over the slide, or send it to a machinist to have it milled for whatever optic you wanted, which was very expensive at the time. During this time, various units in the U.S. military would be given variations of the Glock. The U.S. Marines Criminal Investigation Division and Marine One personnel would be given the Glock 19M, which is a variant of the pistol originally developed for the FBI in 2016, after they had awarded Glock with a contract for their new standard issue SideArms. The FBI had requested features that were not present on Gen 4 Glocks. They wanted their new pistol to have an ambidextrous slide release and a rounded front of the slide. These specifications would greatly influence the development of the 5th generation that would be released the next year. This generation of Glocks would go on to add the features from the FBI's specifications, as well as improve the barrel and remove the finger grooves. During this time, the US military was testing various handguns during the Modular Handgun System competition. This competition was to find a replacement for the military's aging stock of Beretta M9s. Glock offered up their new mashup pistol, the Glock 19X. This variation was a combination of a Glock 17 frame and a Glock 19 slide, as well as the aforementioned Gen 5 features. However, the Glock 19X had a slight problem that was pretty simple but tedious to fix. The 19X had a lanyard loop, as well as a front lip on the magwell of the gun, which made it impossible to load a new Gen 5 G17 mags. This wasn't a huge deal, as you could simply swap the base plates of the magazine to Gen 4 ones or simply use older magazines. The Glock 19X did well in the competition and was set to face off against the Sig Sauer P320 for the final decision. However, this never happened, and the P320 would go on to be selected by the US military in 2 different variations. These being the M17, which was the full-size iteration of the pistol and is being used by the Army, and the M18, which is the compact version of the handgun and is being fielded by the Marines, Navy, and the Air Force. Glock would end up filing a protest over this decision. However, it was shot down only months later. Needless to say, this was a controversial decision to many inside and out of the military. Some wanted to upgrade the M9 instead of replacing it. Others wanted the Glock to win, and understandably so. The SIG P320 platform has several issues such as the frame cracking and the drop firing issue. This has caused many to claim that it was a stupid choice to choose the P320 over the Glock due to the Glock's extensive history of reliability and durability. The SIG M17 and M18 have been in use with the US military since 2017 and are said to remain as their standard handguns for a long time. 3 years later, the French military would select the Glock 17 over the HS-2000 and the CZ P10 to replace their Mac MLE 1950s as well as their PAMAS G1s. So, needless to say, even though Glock didn't win the modular handgun system competition, they will do just fine in the hands of several European countries. One of the most well-known variations of the Glock is USSOCOM's Mark 27 Mod O and Mod 2. This iteration has been used by various special operations units within the US military. The Mark 27 Mod O and Mod 2 both have various upgrades and parts, but are simply fancy Glock 19s. The Mark 27 Mod 2 has a threaded barrel to accept a suppressor, whereas the Mod O does not. Other than that, they are the same and have a milled slide for optics and suppressor height sights. The last variant of the Glock I want to go over today is the Glock 18. This was a select fire iteration of the Glock and was originally developed in 1986. This gun doesn't really have a practical application, as the 1100 to 1400 rounds per minute cyclic rate of the handgun is too unwieldy for accurate shot placement. However, you can switch from full auto and semi-auto at will. The Glock 18 is a fan favorite though, and you can thank pop culture for that. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, the good one, came out in 2009 and was a massive hit. Its campaign is unforgettable and includes a mission where you have to escape a Russian base on a snowmobile. For this, you are equipped with the Glock 18 and hold it in your left hand while steering the snowmobile with the other. This mission was incredibly popular and was remastered, as in the footage you see here, in 2020. Well, that about does it for the story of the Glock. This video was made in large part in memorial to Gaston himself, who passed away in 2023 at the age of 94. No matter what his designs may be used for, we know that he developed these firearms to help protect those of the free world. These handguns have been used in the hands of police officers worldwide to stop terrible things from happening millions of times. Glock designed an iteration for everyone: the waitress getting off work late at night, the old man on a hike in the forest, the police officer responding to a call, and the soldier taking the fight to the enemy. This handgun has done more good for the world than bad, and I hope Gaston passed away knowing that. This has been Matthew from Discreet Resolve Coalition. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.